Hi everybody, welcome to a setup of showing you how to play the first patrol scenario from Sidekick Saga. You probably just picked up the game and you want to play through. The rulebook suggests that you play something called First Patrol, which is the very first scenario in the game, which gives you a sense and an overview of the game without without having to expose all the mechanics just yet. So we're going to go ahead and show you what's in the box and also show you what you need for that first scenario. We'll set it up, and then we'll have a second video come back later for that, and we'll show you how to play once that's set up. So here's the box you got. This is the prototype version, so not all the components are exactly the same, but they're just about. Okay. So from the box here, it comes with the rule book and the scenario book. If you read the first page of the rule book, it's going to tell you right away, hey, what you really want to do is play First Patrol. If this is your first time playing, play First Patrol. Before you get into the meat of the game, it'll show you most of the mechanics of the game so that you can get into the meat of the game, knowing a little bit more. Okay, so put the rulebook off the side here, and the first scenario is right here in the scenario book. It's actually scenario 0. And the idea of this scenario is it shows you most of the mechanics of the game without getting without overwhelming you for your first play. Then by the time you get to your first play, you're getting the real meat of the game, what's called issue 1. Then you'll hopefully have everything down, and the game will be a lot more fun as you're learning what's going on in the game. Okay, so there's right here. This is what the city looks like. This will be important. This is a picture layout here. Now, what we're going to go through is we're going to go through the setup using this picture in these directions. So, hopefully you can follow along with us and see how to set everything up. Okay, so we'll put this off to the side over here, and put the box over here. We're just going to put stuff in there. So for example, a lot of stuff you don't need for scenario 0. First Patrol, you don't need these 2 adventure decks. These are the meat of the game. This is where the main story happens. But for First Patrol, you don't need these. So you can put these to the side. Okay. There's a whole bunch of tokens that come with the game. Most of them are called soy tokens, and there's zeonite communicators, and there's what are called peril tokens with numbers on them. The only thing you really need out of all the tokens that come with the game are the soy tokens for the characters you're going to be using. So in this scenario, we're just going to be using Amethyst Arrow and Blackbird. So everything else can go back into the bag and back into the box. Okay. So these are the 2 heroes we're going to play. The 2 sidekicks are Amethyst Arrow and Blackbird to show you how the game gets set up. Okay. So we'll put these sort of off the side because we're going to be using them. You'll see a whole bunch of white tokens. Again, your mileage may differ when you get the final game because these will be cardboard standees. But these are for create your own superheroes. That's one of my favorite things about this game is you can create your own superheroes after you sort of played it through. But obviously the first time you play, you don't want to do that, so you put those back in the box. You do need this. This is for the City Terror chart. These are the POW tokens. These are little tokens you use to denote damage, like you're fighting supervillains, so you're going to be bumping each other a little bit. So you use these to denote when you take damage and when they take damage. We don't need that many, so we'll just put the rest back in the box, but we'll keep some of them out. These are the tokens you use to move around the city. This represents you, as you are a superhero moving around the city here. So we'll take those out. We don't need the next. We put the rest of these back in the box. Okay. You'll get a whole bunch of little issues like this. The biography is kind of fun because these talk about the backstories of each of the heroes in the game. So there's a little picture and it talks about it. It's sort of like Peter Parker was bitten by a radioactive spider and became Spider-Man fighting crime. So stuff like that, because you can get a sense of how the heroes became sidekicks and decided to fight crime. So you can read that if you want to, or put it back in the box for now. Okay, and this is the main meat of the game, which you don't want to get into just yet. Remember, the whole purpose of this First Patrol scenario is to get you a sense of the game. This is where the real meat of the game is, where the story is. We put these to the side because we don't need these just yet. Okay, we don't need those until we played through a first game. Okay, everything else left in the box are some cards. Okay, put the box over here. We don't need this anymore. There's these 2 cards, the Sidekick of Interest and the City Terror card. We'll need those. These are the player summary cards. These are very useful, 1 for each player. We don't need those 2. We're only going to play a 2-player game. These are the villain cards, and every card in the game should be labeled fairly easily to read with up in the little right left-hand corner what it is. There's 5 villains. In this First Patrol, you're not fighting a villain. You're just fighting some thugs and some gangs which have taken over the city. So these are going to be the big guys that you fight when you do the main story arc. But in the First Patrol here, you don't fight these guys. So you can put these back in the box. There's a whole bunch of characters that look like this in the game. These are the create your own superheroes. So since this is your first time playing, you don't want to create your own superhero just yet until you kind of know more about the game. So go ahead and put these back in the box as well. And all that's left at this point are just all the superheroes. So a couple of them you can't play in the first game. The Mach Q gets unlocked later in the game, and the same with Epsilon Wave. So put those out of the game, put those back in the box. And we just need to find the two for we're playing. We're going to play Blackbird, and Amethyst Arrow is our starting hero. So everything else goes back in the box. So this is all we'll need to play our first game, okay? So let's go ahead and start figuring out what we need to set up, okay? So we're going to go ahead and have, we're going to go through these directions step by step, just like they'll be in the rule book here, pardon me, in the scenario book here. Okay, so we'll start with step 1. Choose your sidekick. Each player chooses a sidekick to play. One player plays 2 sidekicks. Each sidekick gets 1 sidekick sheet, which are these. 5 soy tokens, actually we only need 1 of them. And 2 powers, okay, and the powers will come out here. So this is the choose sidekick part. Now if you look at the picture, what it shows down here is we're going to have our sidekicks down here. So when we're playing the game, when we're ready to play the game, we're going to actually play from this side of the table. So as we're setting up, it's just a little bit easier for me to show you setting it up as if we're setting it like this, okay? So there's that. Each of us gets a marker, as well as our little token will move around the city, okay? And then we also need our powers. Now our powers come from somewhere in one of these decks. You kind of search through them. And power cards look like this. They're kind of orangey yellowish, okay, to kind of stand out. These are very different cards. These cards are intrinsic to your character. Once you have your powers, you pretty much can't lose them. Okay, so what you want to do is find the powers for each of your characters. So Amethyst Arrow is the gang expert and long shot, so she gets those 2. And Blackbird has Krav Maga, and he is a scientist, so he gets those 2. The rest of these, we don't, no more powers are going to come out, so these can go back in the box because we won't need them for the rest of the game. Okay. Now take a look at the powers for your character. You'll notice in the upper left-hand corner up here is a number. This tells you the power level of the thing. And notice that these are also double-sided cards. The front side is the level 1 version of the power. The back side is the level 2 version, which is obviously more powerful. So for this first game, you want to make sure you start on power level 1 for both your powers. So Amethyst Arrow has long shot and gang expert. You put them under the card like this so that you can still remind yourself what your powers are, but you don't have to take up a lot of room with the text, because once you get familiar with the cards, you know what their powers are. If you want to remind yourself, in the upper right-hand corner, some little icons which sort of say a summary of what your powers are. So go ahead and put these under, like this. And part of the reason for doing this is so you use less table space. The other reason, as you go back and forth between your sidekick and your secret identity, you'll want to go back and forth between these and make it easier to see what your powers are at all times as well. So they're made for this. Of course, you can always put your powers off to the side so you can read the whole text. But typically when I play, I like to play with the cards under there so I have myself a little more space for other things, because I know what my powers are. I play with them. Once you play with the characters enough. But if you like to, put them off the side. This is just what I do when I set up. Okay. All right, let's go on to step 2. You might be wondering what these little tokens are for. These are called the soy tokens. There is the Amethyst Arrow soy token and the Blackbird soy token. And what we're going to do next is set up the soy chart. So obviously the soy tokens belong on the soy chart. The soy chart, let's see, this goes according to the picture here. I want to make sure I do what the picture says. The soy chart goes over here, okay? And what we do is we put 1 token on 1 space of the chart. The soy chart is used for disambiguation in the game. Basically, if there comes a point when a supervillain is going to attack one of you 2 and you're in the same range, which one is he going to attack? Who's ever at the highest location, the most interesting on the soy chart. The idea of the soy chart is, let's say Blackbird is the sidekick who's most recently brought a whole bunch of bad guys into prison. So everyone's like, "Rah, we're out to get Blackbird." So he's the most interesting. Then at some point later in the game, Amethyst Arrow takes in a whole bunch of gangs, and all of a sudden people are out to get her. So she rockets to the top when she brings in a whole bunch of villains, and she becomes most interesting. So the idea here is that the sidekick of interest is the person who's most interesting to the villain. So given a choice between two sidekicks to attack, the bad guys will attack the most interesting sidekick, okay? So that's what the soy chart is. Okay. Because it's used for disambiguation, you only ever have one soy token on one slot. All right, so step 3 on your chart is to take the city terror chart and place it just below the soy chart. You'll notice that the graphic is a continuation of the previous one, so you'll know that they go right next to each other. And then take your little red marker and put it here on the number 1 for city terror. One of the ways to lose the game is if the city descends too far into chaos, i.e. the city terror chart makes it all the way to 16 over here, then you lose the game. So the city terror kind of represents how the city is feeling. And you want to keep that under control because you don't want the city to just plain descend into chaos. Okay. All right. Step 4 is we set up the gang hideout. Okay. So we're going to set up the gang hideout next to the city terror chart. So let's see. Find the gang cards. There should be 10 of them. They look like this. They're two-sided. There is the uncontrolled gang on one side. You'll notice that there's 3 characters because their hit points are 3, and the controlled gang, which have 4 characters and their hit points are 4. The idea of the 2 gangs is the uncontrolled gangs are sort of random ones that sort of go out and mess around and cause chaos when they want to, but they're not very disciplined. The controlled gangs, on the other hand, are usually controlled by the villain, so the villain gives them more resources and they're much more structured, so they tend to be a much bigger threat. So uncontrolled gangs aren't as big a threat, and the controlled gangs are a much bigger threat. So while they're kind of waiting to cause problems in the city, they hang out by the city terror chart while they're waiting to be called up. Now, part of the reason they're by the city terror chart is if there are too many gangs out at the end of your turn, this causes the city terror to go up. So part of the reason we put them next to the city terror chart is to remind you, oh yeah, gangs cause city terror, so we need to make sure we update the city terror correctly if we have too many gangs out in the city. All right, but we'll get to that. All right, number 5. Step number 5 is we have to deal with the heroic items, okay? Now the heroic items, so all the superheroes have disappeared. We don't know where they've gone. So we happen to know, because we're in the know, because we're the sidekicks of these superheroes, that they've left a couple of things around the city that we can find useful. We're not sure where they've left them, but if we run down enough leads and go investigating, we can probably find them. So in the base game, there comes with 4 heroic items. You only use 2 of them. So you can take the energy bands of God and the force field control and put those out of the game, put those back in the box. And all you use are the X-ray specs and the Cave Warrior card. So if you want to go find the Cave Warrior card to move around the city a little bit quickly and have a little protection, you can try to find this while you're playing the game. Or you can find the X-ray specs, which help you look deeper into city decks. Okay. Now they start the game, the heroic items start the game hidden. What you do is you discard leads to go and find those, okay? So we'll put those over here in the heroic items tableau, and that's step 5. Step 6 is each player takes a player summary card, okay? We took those out earlier, okay? We'll go ahead and put these kind of on the edges over here, but the basic idea of the turn summary card is you can look at this and everyone knows, everyone's in the same turns, so everyone can kind of see what's going on. I played games before where if you don't have a turn summary card, you're constantly looking back in the rulebook. Hopefully, once you know the game, everything you need is on this card to play the game. Okay, step 7 is we're going to create the city. We're going to take all the location cards and create the city. Now for step 7, the location cards look like this. Okay, location cards have a name up here in the upper right corner, upper left corner, a city type down here, and there's all sorts of different cards in here. Okay, there's uptown, downtown. Now if you take a look at your rule book, your scenario book, this tells you exactly what you want the city to look like. Okay, every scenario, every issue, whenever you play the game, you're always going to get what you want the city to look like. So we're going to take all the city cards and form them in a grid like this, and this is what the city that we're going to protect and explore during the game. Okay, so the base game comes with 9 cities. We don't use the Hero HQ in Scenario 0. This is something you have to unlock in later issues, so this goes back into the box. But we do use the rest of these locations, okay? Move these up just a touch here. More space, okay? So I'm just setting up the city locations just like they are in the rule book, okay? And you'll notice that there are 8 city location cards per location. There are things you can do to give yourself more cards, but generally each location only has 8 cards, and once you run out, you have to wait till the end of an act to get some of those resources back. Okay? So here's the city you explore. Now you'll notice I put a little bit of space beneath each deck. This is because as your normal inclination is when you start moving around the city with your guys is to put them on top of the decks. But because the first thing you do after you move to location is draw a card, you'd have to take your guy off, as you saw I just did. So what you want to do usually is when you put these guys in the city, you'll put them below the city locations. Okay? And that's exactly what we're going to do in step 8, is we're going to find the home locations for each of the heroes. So if you look on each of our hero cards, you'll see that there's a home on there. And for example, here, the home, it's in like kind of bright yellow and orange. The home for Amethyst Arrow is downtown. We're going to put her just below downtown. And Blackbird's home is the uptown, so we'll put him here. Okay. Home locations are important because there are times as the city gets overwhelmed and there's things that prevent you from drawing your location. You can always draw from your home location in the game because you know the secret ins and outs of the location, so you can always get to it. You can always get home. So this is the one location in the game we can always draw a card, even if everything else prevents you. Okay. So step 9, we're going to put out the leads and set up the general sidekick discard. Okay. So the lead cards, these are sort of like clues that you find looking around the city. They look like this. They're very green. They have the little magnifying glass. Think of them as like clues, but they're things you have to follow through on to figure out what's going on with this. So the lead cards go here beneath the hidden items tableau. And part of the reason for that is because lead cards are what you discard. So we'll talk about how you get lead cards later, but when you get lead cards, you can discard a whole bunch of them to find the heroic items. For example, if you take a look at the X-ray specs here, one sidekick may discard 3 leads at the suburbs to find and claim the X-ray specs. So if you get enough leads, you can get some of the items, take some of the items that are hidden and turn them over and put them into your hand. Okay? So that's what the leads are. And then right next to it, you want to set up the general sidekick discard. Any card you use in the game, one-shots, leads, whatever, anything you use as an ability that when you want to discard it, it immediately goes next to the general sidekick discard here. Because a lot of times you're discarding leads or city cards. This is where you want them all to go. And the reason you want them all to go in one place is at the end of a turn is when you're going to take all of those back and you want them to be in one location. So, okay. Step 10. Each sidekick gets 1 lead and 3 home cards. Okay. So now that they're at their locations, they each get their starting set of cards. So each sidekick gets 1 lead card, and each gets 3 cards from their home location. Okay, let's see over here. You get, whoops, sorry, I didn't mean to knock you over. Okay. So you'll see here, this is the starting hand for each of the characters. So in step 10, we're basically just setting up the starting hand. Each character gets 1 lead and 3 cards from your home location. You'll notice that some of the cards you actually pick up from your locations are also leads. So there's many ways to get leads in the games. You can either go in your secret identity to get them, or you can actually draw them from your home location. Okay. All right. So step 11. Step 11 is the Zeonite artifacts. We're not going to play with them for your first game. They're in there in case you want to, if you feel like you're feeling really spicy and you want to try out the Zeonite Communicators rule as well. But in general, I say for your first game, probably don't play with them. But if you want them, they're back in the box here. So we're just going to ignore the Zeonite Communicators for now. Step 12, set up the bad news deck. Okay, so this is kind of a big, long step. So let's go through it. The basic idea, when you're setting up the bad news deck, in the full game, what you're going to do is you're going to have 3 acts, the morning, afternoon, and night, and you're going to have 6 bad news per act, okay? Each issue, as you get into it, it's going to have very bad news that's specific to an act, but you're always going to have exactly 6 bad news per act, okay? So for this intro scenario, we're just going to use generic bad news cards, but before we do that, we want to take and find all the thugs. So thugs come out of the bad news deck. This is what thugs are. They're just bad news. They come out of the bad news deck. And there should be 4 of them in the bad news deck. Okay, so this is what the bad news deck looks like, right? They say bad news, it's real easy to see. Find and take out the 4 thugs, put them off to the side because we're going to use those for what are called the villain forces cards. So we'll put those to the side for now. And then what we want to do is, now we're not going to play a full game for the intro scenario. So take the morning card out, put it back in the box. You're only going to play 2 acts. Act 1 will be the end of afternoon, and Act 2 will be the end of night. So take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 afternoon bad news cards and put them on top of the afternoon deck. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and put those on top of the night. Okay, and then take the rest of your bad news cards and put them back in the box. You won't need those anymore. And then to form your bad news deck, all you simply do is put this deck on top of this. The whole idea of this end of afternoon and end of night card, you know when it's coming. You can see it coming right away. You always know exactly how far away it is. It's not hidden information. When you get to the end of afternoon, certain things happen. So you want to have it very clear when the end of an act comes. So we'll go ahead and put this here, the bad news deck here above the Sidekick Saga. And we're going to set up a little bad news discard right next to it, which we'll use so that everyone can see what the current bad news is. Okay? All right. Step 13, ready your villain forces. Okay, so the villain forces, let's see, we are outside the picture now. Basically what you're going to do is you're going to take 4 gangs from the gang hideout, 1, 2, 3, 4, and mix them, shuffle them in with the thugs from the bad news deck, okay? And this is going to form the villain forces. Now when you get later into the game, the villain forces become there's going to be a lot more stuff in there. They're called minions of the gang. But this forms your bad news deck. It's sort of a mixture of gangs and thugs. Okay? And you put this right here to kind of show this is the villain forces. And what's going to happen is the villain forces come out and terrorize the city, and that's what we have to stop. Okay? So this is your villain forces deck. All right. Step 14 is we're going to reveal our villain forces. Okay? So in revealing our villain forces, the idea is that villains move to the city and cause havoc, okay? So the ones that are in the deck don't cause havoc until they're actually revealed and come out to the city. So there's 2 kinds of cards in the game. There's 2 kinds of bad guys currently. There's uncontrolled gangs and there are the thugs. So when a gang comes out to the city, so at the start of the game we need to reveal N of the villain forces, where N is the number of players plus 1. So because we're in a 2-player game, we're going to reveal 3 villain forces. So whenever we reveal a gang, basically what they do is they come out to the city in city order. They start here on the bad side of town with the warehouse district streets in downtown and make their way to the nice side of town. And of course, one of the last places they want to go is the police station. So that's like one of the last places they'll go. So when villain forces come out, for the gangs, they come out first here, and this is what's called city order. It's like reading. You go left to right, top to bottom. Okay? The second one that comes out goes to the streets. If you had a third gang that come out, he would go to downtown. But the next villain force that comes out, because we shuffle the deck, is Bob, and Bob goes to the warehouse district. Okay? So we actually have a gang and a thug here in the warehouse district. Oh my goodness. That's really bad, okay? So if we're going to the warehouse district, we're going to get beat up. But at some point, that's our job. We have to take out the bad guys. So this is going to be a place, it's going to be a lot of activity, a lot of fighting when we go there to the warehouse district, okay? All right. So you'll notice here that cards are actually on top of the locations. This signifies that you can't draw from that location. So right now I could go to any of these locations as I move around the board, go to the police station, get some police forces, come to Recon Labs, get some stuff there. But if I come here to fight the bad guys, I don't get to draw a resource. So that's one of the things in the game you have to balance. Well, I need to get some stuff to fight the bad guys, but I can't go because as soon as I get there, they're going to fight me, so I can't draw things from that location. So this is one of the things you have to balance as you're playing the game. So whenever you see a card physically on top of the deck like this, you can't draw cards there, unless, of course, it's your home location. If we'd had a third gang here at downtown, this is Amethystero's location. She can always draw from her home location. Okay. All right. Step 15. This is this might seem weird because we don't actually put any cards out for step 15. We started Villain Forces discard. But I wanted to re-emphasize the point that whenever you defeat a bad guy, whenever you defeat a gang, whenever you defeat a thug, you become the most interesting sidekick. So let's say, for example, Amethystero with her longbow, boing, flung an arrow here at this uncontrolled gang, was able to defeat them. So she would immediately, you would defeat this gang, they would go to the villain forces discard, also known as the maximum security prison, and she would immediately, because she just defeated a gang, become the most interesting sidekick. Okay, so that's how the sidekick of interest chart works. Whenever you actually defeat a gang, whoever the last person is to take them out, that is the person who becomes the sidekick of interest. Now, the reason this is important to make this a step is when you put a character here in the villain forces discard, it's right next to the sidekick of interest chart. So this will remind you whenever you defeat a bad guy, he goes right here next to the sidekick of interest. Okay. Step 16, put the POW tokens out. So the POW tokens, we have a lot of space right here next to the police station, so we'll put them here for the moment. The POW tokens are just used to represent when we do damage to things. We don't necessarily take out a bad guy in its first shot. For example, we might, Amethyst Arrow has to fling a bunch of arrows at a gang to get them to take out. But every time we do damage, we can put them on there to show that we're doing damage. Or if we take damage, like this. The POW tokens are also used depending on the number of players in the game. For a 2-player game, every sidekick starts out with 12 hit points. But in a 3-player game, we only start out with 10. So you would use maybe 2 POW tokens to represent that you only have 10 of your 12 hit points. And if you're in a 4-player game, each player only starts with 8 hit points. Okay? All right. So that's what the POW tokens are for. Let's put this back here. All right. And finally, we put out the supply lines. The supply lines is really just a card to tell you the direction that stuff is traveling. Okay? The supply lines are used for sharing cards amongst the heroes. Now, you can usually only share cards with a sidekick adjacent to you. In a 3-player game, this represents, the Ubers and carrier pigeons and drones going around the city, taking stuff to your fellow compatriots. And at the end of an act, this flips and shows that you can now pass stuff the other direction, okay? Well, in a 2-player game, you're just passing stuff to the person next to you. So strictly speaking, you don't need the supply lines in a 2-player game, but we keep it out there just to remind ourselves that it's something we have to deal with in a more player game. Okay, and then finally, step 18 is we start the game. And at this point, we've set up the game and we're ready to go. So check out our next video. Our next video will take this configuration and show you how to play the game first patrol. How do you play that? So we'll show you that in our next video. Thank you so much for coming, and I hope this made it real easy to set up your first game. Thanks.